an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
All right, welcome back to Researchers on a Mission. That's right, Researchers, plural, ROAM Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J, and the reason I say this is Researchers is because in this new extended slot of Rome Radio, for a full 2 hours, I am bringing my international co-host straight from London, live, the one and only Johnny Webb. Johnny Webb, welcome back. It's nice to have you back working with me.
Good to be back with you, sir. How's things?
Oh, it's been great, and obviously the listeners have been enjoying the shows, and we are bringing them another powerhouse show because, as you know, I respect all my guests, but there's a handful of people that I truly, truly hold into the utmost honor because of what they've done, not only with their lives, but throughout their careers. It's also what they've done afterwards, and then taking it one step further, what they have in their hearts. The person we're about to speak to is such a genuine person, down to the bone. Everything about him has the most politeness, the biggest morality that I've ever seen, the best morality, and the most humane person. And he has accomplished so much in his life, so much for the world, and so much for his nation. It is truly an honor to speak with him and to be able to call him a friend, and so much more than that, a mentor. I can go on and on about him. And with that being said, we might as well just jump right into it and introduce the one and only Paul Hellyer. Mr. Hellyer, welcome back.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be back.
I should have said, Mr. Hellyer, that this is the Honorable Paul Hellyer. And for all you listeners out there, you got to remember that this is the highest-ranking politician in the G8 countries to ever speak on the issues we're going to speak upon, which are very important. We're talking about things that are changing the world for a bad cause, things that if we can change, we can actually make society better for the future of our children, grandchildren, and so on and so forth. This earth is on a dire path, and Mr. Hellyer wrote an amazing book, Money Mafia, and this book essentially wasn't even going to happen. If you read his last books, this book was essentially done because he saw so much global crisis that he decided to write on. So Mr. Hellyer, I'm glad you wrote this book because not only did you touch on pretty much every issue ranging from the political secrecies to the global banking, to the technologies hidden by the big oil companies, the New World Order, the Trilateral Commission, everything's in there, range, and even including the visitors from the starry visitors. And I just want to commend you on this amazing book that touches everything. And what I love about it is you, with the life that you've led in the life of Parliament as the defense minister, and also you were the transportation minister as well, right?
Correct, yes.
With through all of that, you've had so much experience as a politician, you were able to write a plan in this book, which I thought was very detailed, and that if the world was to follow, we would actually get to a better place. So without further ado, I'm going to give two quotes that you've written in your book, one directly from you, which is very important for everyone out there listening, because this applies to you. Mr. Hellyer wrote this book for you, and this is, quote, it's for all God's children on earth and in the universe. It's a very important statement because, as the words just said, this is for everybody that's on this planet and beyond, because this affects everyone. The second quote is from Abraham Lincoln, and this is the kickoff of Mr. Hellyer's book, Money Mafia, in Chapter 1. I'm going to read it. It's, quote, I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands, and the republic will be destroyed. That was spoken by Abraham Lincoln. I believe the year was 1865. I could be wrong, but point being, those words never rang more true until these days, today, this era that we're living in. And Mr. Hellyer, I wanted to ask you, why did you insert that quote? Because it is very fitting. It is extremely fitting for what is happening.
Well, it was prophetic, and it's exactly what has happened. The men running the financial system, the banking system, the international cartel, have brought to under one umbrella, as it were, vast riches, so vast that they're almost beyond comprehension. And they have brought this all to themselves by really taking away from the ordinary people who do most of the hard work in this world. So it was a quote that was so relevant, really, to what I wanted to say about the international financial system and what I call the money mafia. It just fit in perfectly. And actually, I have to give credit where credit's due. It was the publisher and editor who found it. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, boy, this is right dead on, and that's a great way to start the book.
And like you said, it's very prophetic, and I'm extremely glad you threw that in there because, as I said earlier, the words never rang more true in the era that we live in now. These corporations have far too much power, and the banking system is so corrupt. Let me throw in this fact for you, which I'm sure you know. Of the 600 top billionaires, a little over 400 in the U.S., 111 or so in Russia, and 120 or so in China. So a little over 600, a little under 650 billionaires in those three countries alone. Last year, increased their net worth combined by $500 billion. These 600 and some individuals literally added approximately $1 billion extra to their net worth. That is a phenomenal number. $500 billion is more than enough money for countries to run on certain smaller countries. Yet these 600 people made this on top of their wealth. Mr. Hellyer, as you know, I've always asked this question. If you have $40 billion, what is there on earth that you can't buy that you need $50 billion for? I mean, that's just a speculation question, but I've always asked that of myself and why they would need so. What do you think?
It's the quirk of personality, isn't it? Some people are never satisfied. They're monopoly players. They've got to have it all. They just keep accumulating, and it goes on and on and on. And they're not just the 650 billionaires. They're more than one or two trillionaires, and they just never give up and keep on accumulating. And unfortunately, at the expense of all of us, because the way they create money, they create it as debt. It's not real money, it's virtual money. They create it as debt, which has to be repaid with interest. So they just are really putting us into a bind. They're making debt slaves of us in order that they can accumulate all of this extra wealth that they don't really need, but gives them, I guess, some sort of pleasure to see accumulating in their books, or their bank books, or wherever they hide the stuff. So it's a sad world, and it has to change. And one of the things I say categorically in my book, and incidentally, the second half of the title is equally applicable. It's The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis. And the world is in a crisis. And one of the reasons for it, one of the principal reasons for it, of course, is the Money Mafia, because they're starving the world for credit, for purchasing power, and there's too many unemployed. I don't know how many millions of people there are unemployed around the world, but it's a fantastic number, and it's just totally immoral. In my country, there are 1 million young people that are unemployed, and it's a crime, just an absolute crime. So here are these people who have leveraged up the money-making system to the point where they can invest $5 and get $20 back on $5. In other words, 20 to 1. And I say that, and you know, you can multiply that by anything. If they invest $1 billion in their capital, they can create $20 billion by lending the credit based on 5. And it's the system is just it's a Ponzi scheme of the first order, and it's absolutely totally immoral, grand larceny I call it, and it's got to stop. So what we have to do, we have to get governments creating at least part of the new money that's created every year instead of giving a monopoly to this handful of the richest people. It's got to stop. They have a monopoly now. They should never have been given a monopoly. This is something they got from politicians. They work very closely with politicians. And so governments who own the patents to create money have got to get in the business of creating money and making it available to the people through expenditures for whatever, infrastructure, pensions, lower taxes, whatever ways that they have to put it in to give the ordinary working people a bit of a break for the work they do. And in my book, I'm recommending that 34% of all the new money created every year should be created by governments, and only 66% by the banking industry. And what this would do would be that governments would have enough money, the 34%, to meet their legitimate needs at every level, federal, state, and municipal, with lower taxes actually than they have now, considerably lower, and still be able to do everything that needs to be done without having to borrow. And that's the aim of the game. So the other thing is we take away the power of the cabal, of the money mafia, to run the world, which they have at the present time. They're just running us into the ground, and they're making life more and more difficult all the time. So one of the first things, the most urgent thing facing humankind at the moment, it's not the most important. The most important is global warming. But the most urgent thing that has to be done is getting the money system changed and getting governments back in the position of creating part, at least. And I would say part because that's the way, the most sensible solution, which doesn't disrupt everything and doesn't cause another recession and so on. Part of the money and balancing their budgets and having enough left over, not only to meet their immediate needs, but also in the short run at least to pay down some of the existing debt. So that's number one on the list.
Mr. Hellyer, it's Mr. Webb in London. Do you think that, like the cause you're on at the moment, the disclosure project regarding the military-industrial complex and disclosing their information, do you think the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England should be having some kind of disclosure project themselves?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. They've been running a closed shop for so long. Do you know how long the Federal Reserve System went without an audit, and how much trouble Congressman Paul had to go to get to an audit? But then when they finally did get an audit, wow, did you see how much money they created? Trillions and trillions of dollars. But none of that wound up or practically none of it wound up in the hands of the people. It all wound up in the hands of the banks. And the banks have used it in some very nefarious ways. They have started going into business and competition with others. They've bought up some ports and oil companies, and they bought a lot of stocks because they were borrowing this money from the Fed at zero cost, and then they would buy blue chip stocks that would pay a dividend and that were appreciating a little bit, and so they were making a handsome return in a competition where they were winning everything, because they had no competition, and they've been in need of an exposure for a long time. As you know, the City of London, which is unique, and most people don't understand that mile square in the middle of London that somehow managed to persuade the government not to tax them. They've been sort of running the financial world for a long time, and they're sharing a little bit of it, or have shared a little bit of it now with Wall Street for quite a while, and particularly since they were primarily responsible for setting up the Federal Reserve System. And it's not federal, it's not reserve, it's a privately owned corporation which has been robbing the people of the United States for 101 years. And I keep saying there will be no peace on earth and no justice until the Fed is wound up and the United States establishes a genuine bank, a genuine central bank owned by the people like we have in Canada. And until that is done, the United States is going to have this annual harangue over increasing the debt limit because they're going to have to keep on borrowing because that's the way the system is set up. And it's the game, the cards are stacked against them from the outset, and allowing the private banks to set up the Fed 101 years ago was probably the worst mistake that the United States has ever made, and the most costly, because at least as much as their entire federal debt was $16 trillion now or something of that order, that much at least they have been robbed, and probably more, and it's got to stop. That's all. They just can't keep on increasing that debt forever and ever and paying the same money lenders that have been taking them to the cleaners for a century or more.
Essentially, and that's what's happening. I want to make a few points exactly on what you said to Johnny's remarks, as well as what you were saying earlier to the first question, all back on these money. The middle class and the poor are suffering the most. As you mentioned, the unemployment rates are so high. People are starving around the globe, and this does not need to happen. Let me throw a few more startling statistics, which I'm sure you know. The Waltons, who own the Walmart Corporation, they earn, just the CEO earns more money before he's gone to lunch than his regular employee at Walmart earns in their entire year. Bill Gates, the richest man in the world, earns $17,000 a minute. Yet other people can't even find a job. There are so many people that have education, have technical skills, trade skills, and yet nobody can get a job. This does not have to be that way. The greed is really out of control. 30 years ago, I think the average was about 30 to 40 times of what the CEO of a corporation made versus what one of their regular employees made. This number has gone up to 100-fold. It is now estimated it is between 200 to 300 times is what the CEO makes of a corporation, ranging from Chevron to Walmart to any of those, than their top other employees. And that's pretty pathetic and sad.
It really is. And the figures I've seen, and that are very close to yours, that there were 40 times, a couple of decades ago, and that now they're closer to 400 times.
That's really disgusting. The gap is just, what does it show the people that work for them? It shows that, am I ever going to get to that level, or it just shows the abominable greed that doesn't need to exist? And again, going to what you said earlier, the debt. The government is set up a system, as you mentioned, for elasticity. Without this debt, they cannot continue to run the government, and that's very sad. As you mentioned, for each dollar that goes in, the banks loan out 20. So they only at any point of time have to hold 5% of their deposits in, and that's how they create money. But yet by doing so and having such a debt crisis like this, they think that that's how they're creating more money and more fixing the economy. But what really happens in the end is just we have skyrocketing debt. that taxes are going higher, and it just seems the U.S., I'm speaking for our government, this is for all you listeners out there, let me just remind you that this is truly an international show. We got the former Defense Minister of Canada on the line calling from Toronto, and of course my co-host Johnny Webb in the UK, and then me in Los Angeles, California, United States. So we're really speaking global issues here, and this is truly an international show. But going back to what Mr. Hellyer said, this is a very sad system, and it needs to be fixed. And there's a few key players that seem to always be appearing all over the place, and a few corporations that are always have their hands in everything and are calling the shots. Some of these corporations are worth more than some of the other countries on this planet. Some of these corporations' annual income exceeds that of some of the G8 countries, which is a very, very sad thing to say when you look at it that way. But, Mr. Hellyer, I want to jump into your book because there's so much amazing information, and like I said earlier, you touched everything. And, of course, we're speaking on the money issues because this is a huge crisis. The bubble will burst again, and unless there's change, we are essentially, as a society, going to die out in that way. The trust from the people into the government has been dissolved, and unless something is done, I don't know how it can be fixed. Now, one thing I did hear someone recently say about protesting, there was protests, there's been protests all around from, as you know, from this brutality of the cops, and one person, there was a church, and essentially these protesters went into the church, and the parishioners were saying, don't come into the house of God and interrupt the services. And one of the parishioners said, I respect you protesting, but instead of going out there and shouting crazy things and walking into the house of God, go vote. And I thought that was a very profound statement because we need change. And you want change, everybody out there? Vote them out of office and start new. Anyhow, George Herbert Walker Bush in, I believe, 1990-91, correct me for the year if I'm wrong, made this very famous statement where he inferred the New World Order, that's where we need to go. And I was hoping, Mr. Hellyer, if we can basically begin on that, because that's what it all comes down to. The New World Order, the three sisters that are basically controlling us, and of course, everything else, the globalization, the money mafia being behind the three sisters, all of this is all tied into everything. And that's what I like about your book, as I mentioned. It interlocks every detail ranging from the technology from the ETs to these billionaires' agenda to the corruption in politics. But let's go with the New World Order. Why did you see it fit to start that as your first chapter?
Because I think it's something that the people should know that government won't tell them. It was before World War II was over. The Council on Foreign Relations in Washington was planning a new empire that was bigger than the German Empire, and included the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and some Far Eastern countries as well. And they've been working at it ever since. And so they have taken on allies over the years. And one of them was the Bilderbergers, who started out, with some reasonable projects like unifying Europe so they wouldn't fight again as they did in the First and Second World Wars. And incidentally, Johnny, my wife and I have just come back from the battlefields of France, where so many millions and millions of people were killed during those two world wars, and the stories just break your heart. There's some of the things I just can't really even talk about them very easily. And I guess the thing, and incidentally, I spent what we call Armistice Day. I think you call it the Veterans Day, November the 11th.
Yes, it's right. The 11th, that was when the World War I treaty was signed, right. Correct? At the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month of 1914?
Yeah.
16.
Well, it ended in 18.
18,
yeah,
okay, that's what it was.
18. And we were there with some former parliamentarians, both Canadian and American. They were 50-50, and the U.S. Parliamentarians decided to go there and invited us to go along. And I was actually on Omaha Beach, on
Normandy.
Yeah, on November 11th.
Juneau.
Yeah, and Juneau Beach the day before. So I guess the thing that came to mind was, first of all, the terrible, terrible stories about war and how it's hell. It's just living hell. And why we get into them, I don't know, but we seem to have a propensity for it. And the thing that ran through my mind was they fought so that we would have freedom and a better life. And I get the distinct impression when I look at the New World Order and what has happened in the last 50 years with this intense greed on the part of the people at the top, that what they died for was in vain, that they didn't create the great new world that was the reason that they were there, the reason allegedly that they gave up their lives. And so what has been happening is that there's the same old thing proceeding toward another dictatorship, really modeled on the one that was existing in Germany in the 1930s. And it has the same name. They called it the same thing. They called it the New World Order. And as a matter of fact, the United States imported after the war some of the scientists from Germany who had Nazi affiliations, and they were brought in to, I guess, help fight communism or some excuse, and they aligned with some American military and set up these underground facilities in Nevada and Arizona. And throughout the years, they have increased to take on the Bilderbergers. The Bilderbergers have been probably one of the leading proponents of this idea of a world run by bankers and the elite, because they somehow think that they're superior beings and that they have a right to govern, that divine right for some strange reason. And so they have been working this, and they are the foundation of what I call in my book the cabal, as you know. It's really headed by the banking cartel, and then it encompasses these three sisters. The Council on Foreign Relations was the oldest, and then the Bilderbergers, and then the third one was the Trilateral Commission that was set up when Japan started building its industrial capacity, and Brzezinski went to David Rockefeller and said it's time we brought them into the loop, and they took this idea to the Bilderbergers, and it was endorsed there, and then that gave David Rockefeller the green light to come back and see that it was actually set up. But these were all came in one at a time, and then they not only control the money, they have the oil cartel, and then the transnational corporations, most of the largest of which are all controlled by or in debt to the banks in one way or another, so that the bankers have control of them as well. And then, of course,
don't forget the think tanks, Paul. We have PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, run by Paul Wolfowitz. Richard Pearl. They had a program, Project for a New American Century, the full spectrum dominance they wanted. Do you know about that?
Oh, absolutely. That's in my book. And it's in both of my last books, as a matter of fact. And let's come back to that in a minute or two, because it's very important as to what has been going on. And then they recruited the intelligence agencies the FBI and the CIA and the NSA, and we've had disclosure in the last few hours of what the CIA actually did in torturing people in a way that is absolutely inhumane and which should never be done. It just, it's just awful. But they were keeping it quiet, the way they keep everything quiet that they do, that they don't want the public to know about. And then a slice of the American military. And they've been working together for about 50 years or 60 years now toward having a new empire, which they call the New World Order. And they're trying to do as much of it as they can, not by force of arms, but by using money to bring people into submission, by, in effect, using debt and lack of credit and so on to get people on their knees and to the point where they would accept martial law and allow totalitarian government to be set up. So this has been going on, and this is still going on, and as I said, it's far advanced, and the military-industrial complex, of course, is part of it. It's an integral part of the whole thing. And now, Johnny, if we come back to the Project for a New American Century, what they were saying was that they wanted to start some wars in Iraq and Iran and Pakistan and so on, and extend the empire over there and make partially over oil, but also partially geopolitical, so that they would keep the Russians and the Chinese out and have control. And so, as you undoubtedly know, and if you certainly read the first draft of the plan for New World Order, you would know that they said, but this is such a change for the American people that maybe they won't buy it unless there's some some event comparable to Pearl Harbor. And then, of course, as you know, they got it in 9/11. That was the excuse that they used to start the war in Iraq, which had been planned long before.
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up. I want to make a couple points to things you said prior to this, which is all relevant. First, going back to what you saw in Normandy. That is extremely sad to think all these millions of people, 50 million total is the casualties from World War II, could have died in vain, because this is one thing I failed to mention when I introduced you. One thing I really appreciate about the way I was raised is you respect your elderly people, because those are the ones who have lived through it. History repeats itself, and that is why I pay very close attention to anybody who has lived those years, and that is why someone in your position who was a politician during your career, and a very, very long career in politics, has first-hand knowledge of how to fix things. And you've seen the terrors of World War II and all the subsequent military action. And a couple other points I want to make is democracy. I don't know if we're actually living in a democracy. As you mentioned, this New World Order, the Third Reich, the Third Reich was using those same exact terms to essentially gain this global empire. And back to the banking of World War II, it's been alleged that the British bankers were funding both sides. And for sure, Prescott Bush, George Herbert Walker's father, who worked, I believe it was Chase Manhattan, I could be wrong, but it was a bank in Manhattan, and he funded the Nazi Party in the late 30s, and I don't know if it stopped right around Pearl Harbor. I'm unaware, but documents prove this. I mean, no one questions this. The American bank was funding the Nazis, and the British were apparently...
Bank in Germany, Thyssen, and yes. Later to be the Kuhn-Loeb Bank.
funding both sides of the war, which just goes to show that they didn't really care about the people that were dying. It all cared about money. And some other point you made earlier, Mr. Hellyer, the God complex. These people assume that they are better than us, that we are beneath them, and yet that they know what's good for us and therefore should be able to dictate what we should know, what we can't know, what rules to follow, and things that put them above the law. And that's a very sad thing, because this can affects our society down to, as we were saying, hunger, to the oil cartels, to every part, every aspect of it. And actually, this might be a good point to interject with what you mentioned, the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower, as you know, was a general, general during World War II, the supreme Allied commander of the Allies, of course, during, as I mentioned, and he was headed the D-Day in Normandy, the invasion. He became president, and being a very militaristic president, obviously forming the military-industrial complex was a big thing to him. Now, if you recall from the citizen hearing, which you participated in, and for all you listeners out there, if you recall, this was took place in April, and end of April, early May 2013 in D.C., over 40 witnesses and a few researchers testified in front of 5 former members of Congress and 1 retired senator, 2 of the committee members, which have recently appeared right here on Rome Radio in the last few weeks, Senator Gravel and Congressman Cook. And they heard testimony from top people, the highest ranking person being Mr. Hellyer, the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer, and which is, again, an honor to speak with you. And point being is, in the military-industrial complex was formed, and it was thriving all throughout the 50s. Yet in 1961, Eisenhower warned us. He said, beware of the military-industrial complex. Now, I always took that growing up was that he was cut out of the loop. He was part of it, and he must have been cut out of the loop. When I saw that interview that Richard Dolan did with the anonymous man, who said that in 1958 he was summoned to the White House. He was in the CIA, along with his commanding officer or commanding agent per se, and he saw President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon, and essentially was told that they are being blocked. The executive branch was being blocked access to what was happening in Area 51. And they weren't giving the updates that were promised on the ET situation and the technology and so on and so forth. And he threatened to invade Area 51 by with the division, the Army division in Colorado, if they did not give him access. So this anonymous fellow, along with his handler, went to the Area 51 and essentially came back and reported news to Eisenhower. So that wanted to bring the background and the groundwork for all the listeners out there to know what happened. And I wanted to go back to you, Mr. Hellyer, now.
On that very point, I think Eisenhower threatened to send in the Third Army before the 3 people were allowed to go out and find out what was going on. And when he said beware of the industrial military complex, he did not include, which he probably should have included, and there are witnesses who believe that what he was really saying was that the ET file had fallen into the wrong hands. And was it you, Johnny, who was saying about, is there a democracy? The answer is no. The United States, the president, is not running the country, and the Congress is not running the country. It's being run by the cabal and has been ever since. I think that Eisenhower, or maybe even Truman, was the last person, or the last president who ever got honest advice. And since then, presidents have never been told all of the things that are going on in those underground facilities in the western United States. And the interesting thing is that here you have a Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, presumably with his finger on the nuclear button, who doesn't know what his subordinates are doing, because they won't tell him, because he's not cleared for it. And in the book, I quote President Clinton, who was asked by an old-timer in the press gallery in the White House why he didn't come clean on what was going on out there. And he said, her name was Sarah McClendon. He said, Sarah, there is a government within the government, and I don't control it. And that is the truth. Neither does Congress. And they have put up, I don't know how much money, and certainly they don't know how much money, but probably in the trillions of dollars to back engineer the flying saucers and the technology that came with them. And this has been at the U.S. taxpayers' expense, most of it, not all of it, perhaps, but most of it at taxpayers' expense. And the Congress is unaware of what's been going on. And this was certainly obvious with the 6 witnesses that we had, the 6 former Congress people we had in Washington, as you say, at the Citizens Disclosure Project. They had no clue as to what was going on out there, absolutely out of the loop, and yet they had been constitutionally responsible for the money that they collected from taxpayers and funneled to these black projects. So the answer to your question is no, there's no democracy. The United States, neither the president nor the Congress is in control. And in Canada, the money mafia is responsible for our high level of unemployment, because they've changed the rules of our central bank in 1974. Until then, for a number of years, we had been sharing the money creation function, which is what I'm proposing now, between the government of Canada and the private banks. But in 1974, the money mafia persuaded our Bank of Canada to take their orders from the Bank for International Settlements in Zurich, Switzerland, and not to provide any further zero-cost money to governments. And that resulted in a huge debt that we've been paying interest on ever since, at a fantastic amount for us. I think, well, $1.1 trillion from 74, 75 to 2010, 11, and you multiply that by, say, 12 for the United States, you're talking about a lot of money of interest that's been paid on money that had to be borrowed, which could have been provided directly by the central bank. So we're under the thumb of the money mafia too, and they determine really the rate of growth and the level of unemployment for our country, because they tell the central bank, in effect, what to do. And this is wrong. It is fundamentally wrong, and it's anti-democratic, and that is exactly the way it's supposed to be, because that fits in with the grand plan.
The elected officials are supposed to be their job is essentially to represent their constituents and report to them what the federal government is doing, and more importantly, implement things that the public is asking. So without this process, we don't have the democracy. And as you said, just the simple fact that the president, who's supposed to be the leader of the free world, is denied access to what's happening in his own country that he's leading is a really sad thought when you think about it. When you really get down and think about that one thought alone, that he doesn't have the clearance for certain national security and other important topics such as ET technology that can change the world. And the fact that the shadow government is really calling the shots and using our elected officials as puppets is a very scary thing. Now, let me throw this into the mix. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but this great gentleman that I know Also someone who I truly respect for what he's done for his country and what he's sacrificed, more importantly. He served in the Vietnam War from 1965 to 1969. He was a Navy SEAL, and this was obviously fairly new at the time because the SEALs, I think, were created in, if I'm not mistaken, the 50s. I'd never asked. But point being, this was at the early times of having one of the elite military programs. He told me in 1965 through 69 during his tour in Vietnam, it was multiple tours and multiple missions, every single directive came down from the CIA. And then he said afterwards he was a mercenary. And the difference is that instead of getting a United States Treasury check, he got a check from a corporation. Yet the orders not only came down from the same agency, the CIA, they came down from the same CIA agent that was giving them the orders. So nothing changed. Officially, for 1965 through 69, as a Navy SEAL, he was carrying out missions for the United States government at the hands of the CIA. 1969 to 1971, as a mercenary, he's carrying out missions for the United States government under the directives of the CIA. Now, the two mercenary missions he did, this is the scary part, and this was just proved what I had been hearing all my life. He said that in 1970, one of the missions was to bring a giant cargo ship full of cocaine to the United States. They had a submarine and two boats involved, and they had full authority to kill anybody from Coast Guard to police to you name it, Customs and Border Patrol, anybody who would get in the way as long as they did it silently, because the boatload of money, essentially money, was used to fund more black operations. Then he said this 1970 was Colombia, 1971, the same operation given down by the same CIA agent who was telling them to go rescue pilots in 1966 and 67, was telling him to guard another cargo ship, this time coming from Peru. And again, this just showed to me the corruption in the government, A, B, the hypocrisy, and then C, that not only is the black budget so out of control officially, where you see all this money that's generated by the United States government via taxes and everything else, yet they're using underground channels to fund things even further. And that was just a scary thought. I don't know if I ever told you that story, but that just confirmed to me how deep this corruption has gone in the government and how deep this money problem is, because it all came back to money. And essentially, money is the root of all evil, and money is what's been corrupting everybody, and money is what's corrupting our society. But yet we can't live with it, and we can't live without it. It would be a great utopia to have no money at all. But I just wanted to get your quick feedback on that before we jump right back into this essential global problem. What did you think of that Navy SEAL? I mean, he's very credible. It took me years for him to start talking. He's not one to openly talk about his things.
I think the irony is that the United States officially has a war against drugs.
Yes, and the sad part is this war on drugs was declared in 1973 and the formation of the DEA, yet the same time that was going on, the same government and the same agents tasked on busting people with drugs were bringing in larger shipments of drugs. And there was a famous person named Freeway Ricky Ross, was what was his nickname was, and he was this gentleman in South Los Angeles in the very bad area, and he had a CIA handler, and he had a giant cocaine dealer, and he sold a lot of crack cocaine and essentially for the government, but I don't know if he knew that. And then somewhere down the line, someone must have saw him to a threat because he ended up jailed for a couple decades or however long it was. But anyway, I'm glad you mentioned the irony, and it all goes back down to money. And now I'm going to get this to the next point now, because this ties in the military-industrial complex, what we've just been saying about the corruption, and now technology. Technology that can save us from using our fossil fuels, from starving, essentially, things that can end world hunger. And they're at the fingertips of these oil cartels. We know these billionaires have access to them. We know through various witnesses that we have been researching crashed and retrieved disks and other objects that have come from outside this planet, from other civilizations, and we have obviously had a chance to reverse engineer some of this technology and apply it militarily. For instance, Colonel Philip Corso wrote the book The Day After Roswell. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe you can briefly tell the listeners, isn't that what got you on the road to this path and opened your eyes in terms of ufology?
Well, actually, it was the first book that I read on the subject. And it was as a result of reading the book and believing that it was true, and then checking that with a retired United States Air Force general, that I had the courage to, I shouldn't say the courage, but I decided that it was essential that I go public, because I thought the issues were so fantastically large that the United States people had a right to know what was going on, and the people of the world had a right to know what was going on, whether we're planning to get into a galactic war with one or more species of ETs, or just what the score is. And that, of course, was the reason that I took the stand with the others at the Citizens Disclosure Project. And I thought it was interesting that the consensus of the 40 witnesses was that although the excuse had been given to both the president and to Congress that there were national security issues that decided that they shouldn't be given information as to what was going on, the 40, and I don't know of any exceptions, thought it was really power and greed that were the deciding votes in the cover-up, and that it had nothing to do with national security whatsoever. Now, you probably get somebody that would take have some trouble with that, and maybe, in the early years after World War II, when we didn't know what the Russians had or how many of the German scientists they had and whether they were ahead or behind, there might have been some reasonable doubt and enough to keep some of the stuff secret. But when the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War ended, we should have had a peace dividend and not have looked for an excuse to actually increase expenditures on wars and weapons that happened as a result of the military-industrial complex and the plan for a new American century.
Mr. Hellyer, I want to make a couple comments, and then we're going to briefly take a break. Everybody, hang tight. We'll be back soon. The Patriot Act, as you know, which was signed into law after 9/11, essentially stripped away more rights of the people of the United States, to where anything associated with national security and to label something as a national security issue, all you need is reasonable suspicion, which doesn't rise to the level of the probable cause test. In a court of law, probable cause has a higher standard than reasonable suspicion. You can really have anything for reasonable suspicion. If you called and said, I think my neighbor's a terrorist, boom, before you know it, that person's going to be under surveillance. Now, I want to throw this one little thing into the mix real quick. I just recently read an article of another DEA scandal. Apparently, rather than using what they've been normally supposed to do is track someone, follow them, get some evidence, then get a judge to issue you a warrant for wiretap, they've been using the Patriot Act. The NSA has been feeding the DEA and other government agencies with information that they've acquired through the monitoring the citizens of the United States as well as citizens of other countries, allies. It's a very scary thought to know that our allies and the heads of states are being monitored. But the scandal was that the NSA would be giving tips to the DEA and say, okay, on this Tuesday night at 9 p.m. on this road, watch for this truck and be right there with the drug dog. And rather than using, when it came time for trial, using the informant tip as a legitimate one, they can't because there was no official wiretap, no warrant to justify that tip. So what they had to basically craft was a traffic stop and pretend that everything arose from the traffic stop. So if the traffic stop involved a drug dog and the drug dog started barking, then that gives probable cause to search the car. And so essentially there's a lot of people that have been put to prison in the last decade plus since the Patriot Act was enacted by using wiretaps that were not even warranted. Anyhow, with that being said, we're going to take a brief break. We'll come right back. We're going to speak so much more on the money mafia, the ET technologies that can change the world, and the cabal, how we can bring them down and make our society a better place. Everybody hang tight. Dr. J with Johnny Webb and, of course, the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Researcher on a Mission Radio, ROAM. As I said, I'm your host, Dr. J, and this special show, co-hosting with me, researchers, is my co-researcher on a mission, Johnny Webb, straight from the UK. And as you heard from Hour 1, this is an exceptionally special show, dear to my heart, not just because of the topic, but the person that we've been speaking to, someone who I hold to the utmost respect, one of the highest people that I hold in my heart as in that high of respect. And I think he speaks for himself, everything he has done in his life and everything we've been leading up to. Anyhow, that person, as you all know, if you've caught us on late, is the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer. Mr. Hellyer, of course, served as the Defense Minister of Canada, along with so many other titles, in a very, very long political career that served the great nation of Canada, as well as now serving humankind on a global level by giving us this information in this remarkable new book, Money Mafia, which is one of many books Mr. Hellyer has written over the decades, but this one being very dear to me because it's showing us that history has been repeating itself, and we are on a dire path. Now, right before we went to break, we brought up the citizen hearing. Paul T. Hellyer testified at the citizen hearing, and he was the highest-ranking politician of the G8 countries to ever speak on this topic. And Mr. Hellyer, obviously, this was the most profound experience that I saw, to see 6 skeptics change their minds and transform into full believers. I had watched the hearings from beginning to end every day, morning through night, all day, every single day. And each day, all 5 congressmen and Senator Gravel gave an interview at the end of each day saying how they feel. You can literally see the transformation. The end of day 1, I remember Congressman Roscoe Bartlett, saying, yes, I have an open mind. There surely could be something, but I need more scientific proof. Same thing with Senator Gravel. I think it'd be arrogant for us to say that we are alone, not alone, but I need to see some more out there. I don't know how we'd be able to travel here. By the 5th day, all 6 of them unequivocally said, the Earth has been engaged by one or more species not originating from Earth, and the government of the United States, along with the other global governments, have kept this under wraps, this secret, since at least 1947, if not earlier. And my speculation is that it's been earlier because of more information that has come forward. And now, at the base of this, as we've been talking about, and just exactly what your book suggests, Money Mafia, this all comes down to money. Why? Because the technologies recovered from these crashed disks, which we have been reverse engineering since one of them I know, Cape Girardeau incident, Missouri, 1941. Of course, the 1942 Battle of Los Angeles supposedly netted 2 more craft, and one in the Pacific Ocean and one in the San Bernardino Mountains. And then everybody knows Roswell. Why? That was the first and only time the United States government has publicly said, we found a flying saucer, and then, of course, retracted it with a weather balloon. With that being said, Colonel Philip Corso was tasked with the Department of Defense had an unlimited budget, and he went to different companies with these alien artifacts and was seeing what they can do and how they could recreate these with earthly materials, and most importantly, what military applications can come about these. Several things are credited with him, such as improving our lasers, making our night vision to what it is versus what it used to be, the grainy green. Now it's actually true night vision, and apparently this came off a lens, an eyelid. Apparently that these ETs use. It's not born with, but it's an external thing they wear. To fiber optics, to Kevlar, to other things. And again, the reason why I said, Mr. Hellyer, that this is all about money is because for at least 20 years, if not more, I took the 20 years from your book, is that The oil companies have had technology for the clean energy to sustain everybody on this earth, yet the reason they're not giving it to us is because they can't make money from it. Again, greed. Mr. Hellyer, how do we address this? What do we do?
Well, it's I would say the number one problem, well, or number two, or maybe there are two number ones facing the world today. Many years ago, it was disclosed that the people working in Area 51 had developed both cold fusion and zero-point energy. Who actually owns the patents, I don't know, but I do know that other people have replicated this sort of thing and have always had somebody come around and take it away from them and destroy it or intimidate them in some ways to keep them from getting it into the commercial field. And whether it's the oil companies that own the patents or whether it's the banks or somebody else, it is the cabal, the people who are running the world, who certainly have it. And it's probably there are a number of secret patents. There were thousands of secret patents filed in the post-war period. And I think probably it will require a presidential order to make them public. And this is something that President Obama could do to help improve his record, is to order the disclosure of those secret patents and set the terms so that there are no royalties or no big royalties, no prohibitive royalties in making the technology available to everyone in the whole world so that we can do what we have to do. And what we have to do is, first of all, let me go back a little bit. 4 years ago 3 or 4 years ago when I wrote Light at the End of the Tunnel, which I thought was going to be my last book, I said we had 10 years to change from fossil fuels to clean energy. And then 3 or 4 years has gone by, so I now say 7 years. And I say this is a very conservative number in the sense that if we could do it faster, we should, but trying to be realistic and say that in 7 years we should change the power source in every car, truck, tractor, airplane, ship, and home in the world. And of course people just sort of say, well, that's absurd, but it's not. It's possible. And the reason, Johnny, going back to being old, you remember what has been done in the past. And during World War II, I remember very well that all the car companies, the manufacturers and the manufacturers of washing machines and refrigerators, they were all converted to manufacturing arms. And it didn't take 7 years. It was done almost, very, very fast. And we won the war. We may have lost it since, but we've won the war at the time and gave ourselves another chance. We have to do exactly the opposite today. We have to take all those factories that are producing munitions and drones and so on and killing innocent people and start the manufacturing the clean energy boxes that can be installed in cars and trucks and planes and houses. And if we really set our minds to it, and one of the things that I say, and here I'm jumping ahead a little bit, the G20, which was supposed to be a big new thing, and they were going to do a lot of wonderful things for the world, have done absolutely nothing. Maybe absolutely is too harsh a little bit, but nothing I can think of they have done that's worthwhile doing except having the pictures taken. And the pictures, they have photo ops every once in a while because they have been infiltrated. They have moles in their advisory systems so that nearly every one of them has somebody who has worked for one of the banks or in the financial system somewhere who was advising them, and they spent most of their time, the first couple of years, and are still spending much of their time, saving the banks, saving the rotten system that's responsible for where we are today. So that's been their principal contribution. Well, what they should do is to adopt this worldwide plan to change the world in 7 years from fossil fuels to clean energy. Incidentally, fossil fuels are more valuable for other things than they are now for gasoline, so that the people who have shares in fossil fuel companies don't have to lament. They might have to wait longer to get their money out, but they would get it out eventually, and probably more. But we have to have a decision at the top to do this, and then for the whole world to get together. And instead of, fighting back and forth with Russia and wondering if China's going to take the lead and all of this sort of thing, that everybody gets together and starts to save the planet that we have been given, one of the best planets, I understand, and that people know about, and with the most resources and the most beauty and just a wonderful planet that we have been desecrating. The way we treat it, it's just awful. We're killing our oceans and clear cutting the trees, the forests, and doing all sorts of dreadful things that we have to stop doing, and do this thing in 7 years and stop global warming. And of course, one of the things that you mentioned off air that is recommended in my book is a massive tree planting program worldwide. Two things: one, to stop cutting down the rainforests, which is fundamental because they absorb so much carbon, and stop that even if the rich countries have to subsidize totally any of the people that would benefit from cutting them down. Just stop it, period. And then also to start planting trees like we've never seen before right around the world, so that we have the capacity to absorb more of the carbon dioxide naturally through the trees. Well, if we did both of these things, and we could do them both simultaneously, if we organized at the high level of the G20 and worked from there out, our planet might be saved, and we might actually allow the human species to survive. The way we're going, heaven help us, I don't know where it ends, but all you have to do is look at the intensity of the storms and the weather and the things that are happening, and you can't help but be concerned for what the future holds. And we're just barely getting into it. This is just the beginning. So we had better act, and we had better act fast. And it means, I guess, I would like to see the leadership come from the United States, because they have been, you have a responsibility to the world due to the things that have happened in the last 10 years, including 9/11 and the wars in Iraq, and how things have gone terribly wrong there. The war in Afghanistan hasn't accomplished what it was supposed to do. And so the United States has a responsibility of taking leadership of a different kind. And this would be a great opportunity to say we're going to change. We're going to work for the world, and we're going to work for all humankind, and as partners and as fellow human citizens. And what a wonderful thing that would be, and it's possible. But let's get it started.
Exactly. We need to get that started. We are desecrating our earth, as you mentioned. These trees that are being cut down, people seem to forget, as you mentioned, that they are absorbing our carbon. They are the lungs of the earth. And as you mentioned, we live in a very pristine, beautiful planet, and we are killing it. We are making it so people seem to forget that this planet doesn't just host human beings. It holds so much other life. And we're not only killing us and making it to where our future generations may not have a home. We're making it so other forms of God's life, God's creatures, are dying off and will never, ever come back. That is a thought that people need to put in their minds, because that's when they need to realize that you can't be so selfless or selfish and arrogant to think that everything needs to be done for you and only for your benefit, because in order for us to change, people need to become the opposite, which is selfless. As you mentioned, that we need to get on this plan to make it more productive for our society by allowing these clean energies, using the fossil fuels for other reasons, or don't even interrupt them. Don't suck them out of the ground, the oil, and replace it with salt water. We have yet to see over a long period of time what that's going to do. And another thing you mentioned is these dramatic increases of these hurricanes and this crazy weather. The Northeast, the Northern America, has had one of the worst winters in the last couple years. The winters have been just extremely cold. And on the other end of the spectrum, here in Los Angeles, California, Southern California, we've had the opposite. We've had some of the hottest years on record and some of the highest levels of drought ever. This is no coincidence. Yes, I think there are Earth cycles, but obviously us messing with our ecology is clearly something that is of great concern to me, clearly great concern to you, that got you to write this book, but it needs to be a concern of everybody. Now, as you said, we need to implement this 7-year plan, or within 7 years, and it could be done even sooner. But I fear that the people that should be implementing this plan are too corrupt by the money and everything else that drives them, that is not the real reason that should be driving them, which is a better society and things of that nature. Mr. Hellyer, do you think that we can convince the powers that be that we are going to lose this earth if they don't change? Or do you think there's any way we can wake them up to say, hey, listen, you're going to kill off a lot of these people. Your children and your children's children won't have a place to live if you don't change your ways. Do you think there's anything we can do to get it to their heads that this needs to be done?
Or to go over their heads and do it, which is the other possibility. And I keep saying, to my friends who know how powerful the banking cartel is, for example, yes, they have the money, but we have the numbers. And if we really mobilized the numbers, and I have mentioned, a combination of concerned citizens and youth and veterans of all wars and so on, getting together and saying and meaning it, that we want governments to do the things that we want them to do, and that includes, I would hope, most of the list that I have in the book. And if they don't, they're toast. And it is possible, because politicians will listen if they think they're going to lose their jobs. And that's the only way that you can get their attention, because otherwise they're too busy having dinner with the bankers and hobnobbing with the great and the powerful and having fine meals and enjoying life and enjoying public life in such a way that they want to hang on to the jobs. So it is possible. As far as getting through to them, there are rumors, of course, as you have heard and as you know, that if the United States has developed spaceships comparable to some of the ones that have come here from other planets, that the people who are responsible for the mess have an opportunity, or at least they have a plan, a backup plan, to move to another planet if this one is wrecked. And if this one, for example, should have a nuclear war. And on that score, one of the most discouraging things I have seen in months was a great new plant that's been established in the United States to improve the existing nuclear weapons and design new ones. Surely we're past that. Surely there's a little common sense somewhere. And this just underlines nobody in their right mind would contemplate using nuclear weapons. Yet I understand that the United States Armed Forces have not yet renounced first strike, which would ruin the world, make it uninhabitable. So how do you get sense through to people like that? I do not know, except to take away their power. Maybe that means taking away their money. But certainly this plant that was just opened is an example of the worst possible strategic planning that anybody could be. You couldn't. I don't know how you could go further afield, further down the wrong road, than to go down that road. So it's going to take a lot of people power to make the powers that be, the congressmen and the presidents, pay attention and do what has to be done. Not impossible. If it were impossible, I guess you and I wouldn't be talking.
That's right. And I love what you said. Wouldn't it be nice if we could take their money away? Because clearly this seems to be their driving force. This is their God, per se, which is very sad that money trumps all in their lives. Money buys power. People don't seem to think that's true, but yes, when you have that kind of money that these billionaires hold, you are literally influencing global decisions. Geopolitical issues are what the Bilderbergers do. And maybe in the 50s, maybe they actually had a good intention, but clearly, as you know, as you've written about, everything they've done has been to benefit themselves, has been to make sure that they make more money at the expense of everybody else. And of course, I'm sure you've heard this, and you address the FEMA death camps in your book. There's this great conspiracy, it's even written in the Georgia Guidestones, that we are overpopulated and the sustainable population of Earth should be around 500 million people. If that's true, then they want to wipe away 6.5 billion people, because I think the last count, we are a little over 7 billion people on this planet. 6.5 billion people is what they want to kill. There was something recently I saw. I forget the name, what they called themselves, maybe the good guys or something along the lines of that. And it was a handful of billionaires, one of them being Oprah Winfrey, whose sole meeting of what they met in New York for this group was to figure out how to depopulate the world. They're trying to essentially do what Hitler did and say, you can't have babies, you can't, or whatever they're going to do. And I'm sure you might have also known this. There are patents on certain viruses. I was astounded to know that. I didn't think it'd be possible, but yet it's out there. It's out there. That and another thing that we jumped into earlier, patents that can save us. Going back to this clean energy for a moment, I'll give you a brief little story. This gentleman, two gentlemen, separate years, but one in particular that I saw a short clip about. He was in Japan. He took an old Nissan that he had and he converted it into a water-powered car. Okay? Then the media was invited. Everybody saw him start the engine. He opened the hood, showed him how it works, and then he took one of the journalists on a drive just to show him, hey, everything's fine. It's essentially it's not quite steam powered, but yes, essentially it is, because it's still using the internal combustion engine, which in essence, for you're using water. How do you combust to water? You don't. You create steam. But point being is that within a week of this airing, this gentleman goes missing. His car is gone, and his notes and everything else in his laboratory are gone. This person is probably no longer with us. Why? Because they wanted to silence him. That just goes to show you the great lengths that these people would go to sacrifice what could change us, what can give us the clean energy, what can give the people a better chance of life. Our future generations, the children and great-grandchildren and future generations, obviously we all want to see everybody survive for as long as they can, and the human race to survive for as long as the planet will take us. But if we kill the planet, we're going to kill everything on it as well. And another thing you mentioned too is I would think that after almost 70 years, and some of these craft that have been here over 70 years, such as the Cape Girardeau, Missouri incident from 1941, 73 years the United States government has had these ships. As a matter of fact, Hitler had one from the Black Forest crash, allegedly from 1936, if I'm not mistaken. It could be 38. And he had this ship that he apparently was reverse engineering. So the point I'm trying to get at is you would think that over a 77-year history, or 79 if it was 36, that's coming 2015, that we would have done something and replicate these spacecraft to be able to go to other planets. And these billionaires are probably already creating plans to, when things get ugly on Earth, for them to take their billionaire friends and their amenities and go to their new colonies. And that's a scary thought because they'll leave us to offend ourselves. But Mr. Hellyer, I know I just made a bunch of points and touched on things you said, but I figured this would be a perfect time, because we have a little under 30 minutes of the program. We could still touch on several other issues, but I think it's a perfect time for us to mention what you laid out in your book as how we can fix this problem, essentially our global problem. Do you want me to list the first one, or do you want to spout them out,
Well,
Mr. Hellyer?
You can do that, but number one that we have to do really is to get governments into the money creation business. And this one is more a power thing. It is a way of restoring democracy. If governments start creating money, then they are no longer dependent on those rich people who are controlling the world at the present time. So it's a question of getting out from under the wings or whatever. And I've often said that the money cartel at the moment is like a snake, and it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter around the governments of Europe. They're in terrible trouble, and they're creating all of this unemployment in Canada, in the United States, and elsewhere. And it's like a snake that coils around and tightens up and chokes you more and more and more, and you have to have more austerity and higher taxes and lower benefits and moving in the wrong direction. So the only thing to do there is to cut the head of the snake off, cut the serpent's head off. And the way to do that is very simple, and that's for governments to use their power and use it on behalf of the people. And we own the patent to create money. The people own the patent to create money, and the banks have no rights in that regard. They're just licensees. And why we would have given them a monopoly to create money, I really don't know, but it's happened, and that's the way it is at the present time. So the first thing we have to do is to start governments creating a substantial proportion of the money that they need for meeting legitimate needs of the people and getting themselves out from under the absolute control of the money mafia. So that's number one. And then after that, we have to go down the road of changing from fossil fuels to clean energy, and that is going to be a major problem. When I say problem, opportunity, really. And incidentally, because I've been a maverick economist or whatever, economic maverick, I guess would be better, for 65 years, I'm not the least bit interested about or concerned about people losing jobs. Of course, they will change. They'll have to change, just as they did during World War II, and as when they did when automobiles replaced buggies and so on. There'll be a considerable disruption, but there will be more jobs available rather than less. So there will be job opportunities opening up as faster, I would hope faster, than the jobs that are disappearing. So that we should do and we must do, and have no fear. It's good. Was it Roosevelt who said our only fear is fear itself, or something or other? I'm forgetting the actual.
Don't know that one, but I do know another amazing one of his quotes that might be appropriate here. I might as well spit it out real quick to you if you don't mind. It's by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it was, "Far better it is to dare mighty things and to win glorious triumphs, although checkered by failure, than it is to take rank with those poor souls who neither suffer much nor enjoy much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat." With that being said, I would not be surprised that he was the same person who spouted the other quote that you just said.
I think it was, "We have no fear. There is no fear but fear itself," or something like that. Anyway, so we should get on with that, of course, and then we've already talked about reforestation, and then we have to turn some attention to the oceans. We have almost killed them, and that's the source of life.
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up. First of all, let me just comment on what you said. You actually spelled out exactly in order, essentially, kind of what you wrote in your book. The first thing, it was the title that you wrote, was "End the Great Recession," and yes, that is primary what we need to do. And like you said, we need to stop this deforestation and start this massive tree planting campaign so we can basically change what we've done to the world by taking the lungs away of the earth. Without Mother Earth and with what God's given us, we will lose everything. The oceans, as you said, these are what we have relied on for survival in so many ways. As Jesus said, something along the lines of, rather than providing someone a fish, teach a man to fish. But the reason why I brought that up is because the fishermen of the world they've been a big supplier of food, going back to antiquity, probably some of the earliest civilizations. Anybody who lived near the coast was obviously seeing these little living things, and after the creation of fire, they would obviously see these. They were protein-based diets, so of course you would just think that they would be eating fish, and of course as we continue to eat fish, this just proves it, that these are an integral part. Yet, at the same time, we have massive extinction of certain types of fish. Worse, on top of the extinction, you ask me what can be worse of losing a species? I'll tell you what's worse, is the mutations that are coming from these fish being exposed to radiation. And Fukushima is still dumping so much radioactive waste into the Pacific Ocean that it's been postulated that anybody fishing off the coast of California or anywhere in the Pacific Ocean is basically getting nuclear fish, for lack of a better term. That's what is being fed to the world, and I don't think it's not too distant future that the Atlantic Ocean too will also be affected by this Fukushima. And another thing, global warming. People seem to think that, okay, so what, things are going to get a little hotter? Well, wait a minute. It's not just that things are going to get hotter. Our ecology is going to change drastically. Well, how is that, people say? I'll give you one example, which I know you know. I'm saying I'm speaking to other people when I had to answer this question. One example that I was giving them was the ice caps, the polar ice caps. If they melt, you're going to have fresh water be dumped into our oceans. What's that going to do? It's going to change the salinity level. The salt water is going to change the level of them, which is going to cause a few things. One of them, obviously, there's going to be more dying of certain fish. And, of course, there's going to be migration of fish to where they can actually live. And probably one of the biggest changes that the scientists have discovered is the currents. The currents of the ocean would change, which would essentially disrupt almost everything. And so I'm glad you mentioned the oceans, Mr. Hellyer, because they are a very integral part. They are just as important as saving our trees. Our oceans, our trees, our air, and our animals. Air, trees, waters, animals, and us being part of the animal kingdom, of course, that just is where our primary focus should be, saving this earth. Now, on that
I think one thing that we probably skipped over was chemical contamination.
Yes. Let's talk about that briefly. I'll let you go ahead and tell.
I'm just saying we're dumping so many chemicals into our bodies and into the water of our lakes and rivers, which wind up in the oceans, that they're having an effect on the fundamental, the basic food chain from the bottom up, and it's getting very very close to a catastrophe, and we're going to have to do something about that one too.
Yes, and you took the words essentially out of what I was thinking, and I'm very glad you said it in such a way, because the chemicals, both from what we are dumping in our oceans, are dumping in the toilet, which essentially ends into our rivers, streams, and oceans, or burying underground, which seeps into the ground and affects everything else around it, or worse, what I've heard recently is some of our old nuclear waste. What we've done is a right idea. Let's put it underground. Now I'm hearing that the nuclear waste containers are not sturdy enough to hold that waste, to contain it, which means that we have radioactive waste underground on several key locations around our planet, specifically in the countries that use nuclear power and have nuclear weapons. And this waste is seeping into Mother Earth, and that is a very scary thought. And when you add all that up, the chemicals that we ingest in our bodies that come out of us and end up in our oceans, what we've been actually dumping it directly into the ocean, and what we've been putting into the ground is affecting our ocean and our land and our air to some extent. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because chemicals also extends to air. The waste that we've been giving, exactly, the waste we've been giving out from our emissions is just out of control. So I'm glad you brought that chemical.
Fukushima again.
Well, we're just about running out of time, and I was thinking about the postscript of my book.
Well, I did want to let you know, Mr. Hellyer, we do have a little bit, about 15 minutes or so. So if you wanted to go through a couple of, we can go to the postscript now, or if you want to go through a couple more of these.
We had quite that much time. Are there a couple of things on the list here that you want to?
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you is let me just spit out the list, and we've already talked about a few things. End the Great Recession, which is a big thing. Support full disclosure, massive tree planting campaign.
I think on the full disclosure, maybe we haven't quite said that this is a massive thing, because when you realize that what's been going on in back engineering has been going on, as you said, for 70 years. Well, it probably in the United States they started in earnest about 60 or 65 years ago, in the not long after Roswell, and it's been going on all of that time with some of the best scientists, and they've been working on it with virtually unlimited funds, and presumably they have accomplished mind-boggling things. Some of them not good, maybe others good. Ben Rich, I think, the former late head of the Skunk Works and Lockheed Corporation, who were working on first of all the stealth bombers and then the interstellar craft, apparently told some of his classmates before he died that we now have the technology to take ET home. So that's you could say that's a plus perhaps, but then there's the question of weapons, and the ones that are used or could possibly be used or may be being used against other space vehicles, which are really diabolical. And I think we have to really push the disclosure envelope. Not all at once. It doesn't have to be overnight, but they have to get started. And they have to have a commission of some kind and to be able to call witnesses and to find out what has been going on all of these years, including some of the things that have been done that are illegal. And a couple of times on programs like this, I've mentioned Jim Sparks' suggestion that I have in my book that he got from the extraterrestrials themselves, and that is an amnesty for most of the crimes that have been committed by the people who have been working in black operations all of these years. Now, I think there may be a couple of exceptions there, for murder and mass murder, that perhaps would have to be some punishment that would be possible. But for most of the things that have been done, to just grant a general amnesty so that the people would tell the truth and get it out in an orderly fashion, starting with what happened 65 years ago and then coming right down through the years to the present. So I think we have to push that one. And what else have we got on the list there?
But let me just make a quick comment on what you just said. I'm really glad you mentioned amnesty, and as you quoted Jim Sparks, who apparently he was told this from the visitors themselves. But you're absolutely right. When I spoke to Nick Redfern, who wrote a recent book, Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind, the book wasn't about ETs killing humans, although there was a chapter probably by accident or through pathogens when they passed away. But the majority of the book was people who have died because they were about to talk. Some people infer from James Forrestal was killed because he was about to talk. Anyhow, the point being is we need amnesty, because if we don't have these amnesty, these people are not going to want to talk, because they're going to know that they're going to be tried, convicted, and sentenced to life without parole, if not the death penalty, for certain murders that were done just in this furtherance of covering up. One last thing I wanted to point out was when you mentioned Ben Rich, I think he was one of the white hats, because like you said before he passed away, he gave that very famous speech to the UCLA Alumni Association of the Engineers, the engineering department. And not only did he say we have technology in the Nevada desert to take ET home, we have technology that would make George Lucas envious. And he also mentioned that we've had something wrong with the equations and we figured it out. So essentially, I think he was one of the white hats, and he gave us a great message. Anyhow, going back to the list, I'll just read off the last three. Write off the third world debt, wind up the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and of course a Tobin tax. Those are the final three that I was hoping you wanted to touch on those for the next 5 or so minutes before we go on to your postscript, maybe 7.
I think it's important. We have to reduce the debt. And once the governments get back in the business of creating part of the money, even at 34%, which I think is probably as good a figure as you can come up with, you're able to pay down maybe 25 or 33% of the existing debt. And what a difference that would make, because it would free up the interest payments that are going now for that debt for constructive things. And as far as the Tobin tax is concerned, I'm very much in favor of it, because the big banks have had software created that allows them to skim off a little bit of the profit from international currency transactions in nanoseconds. And it's just like the old kings who used to take a little bit of the gold off the coins when they passed them through. And this is the same thing, but the technique is applied to trillions of dollars that are traded every day. And so they pick up just a little fraction of each transaction, and it amounts to huge sums. And this is just one more way they have of skimming us. And even a modest Tobin tax could be used to perhaps provide aid and comfort to the millions of people now who are displaced around the world by wars and insurrections and other things. I've spent this morning actually listening to some of the terrible things that are going on in the Middle East as a result of the war over there and what is happening, and it just breaks your heart. The one story that stands out, some people phoned a girl that we've listened to today and said, come over and bring some things for us, and what things? Gas. What do you mean? Gasoline, and pour it on us and light us a fire, because it would be better than our existence as it is. Just horrible things. And this, I guess, the final thing then to come full circle is the postscript, where I say the missing link in all of the things that we've talked about is spirituality. Really, morality and spirituality. We're governed by people who are, to a very large extent, amoral, and certainly the cabal and the banking cartel and the oil cartel would qualify for being largely amoral. And we need people who have a spiritual outlook and who revere creation as being a wonderful gift, and who consider themselves stewards of it, and who want to treat it with respect. And not only that, but the creation of the human species as well, to treat other people as they would wish to be treated themselves if the situation was reversed. And this is something that applies right down the line of the religions. One of the people we were listening to this morning was the vicar of Baghdad, who says he loves Muslims, he loves Jews, he loves Christians, he loves everybody, and said the people you hate are people whose stories you have not heard. If you hear someone's story, then the chances are that you will become their friend. And it was really a remarkable couple of hours that we had listening to the vicar and to a Muslim doctor, a female doctor, who was working with him and providing food to people who are refugees in that area. But he and she are shining examples of the best in humanity. And in the postscript, I mentioned a few names and say that there's some wonderful things being done by wonderful people. So we can't be entirely pessimistic. We have to say there is hope, because there is hope. And all we have to do is to have more people who do the kinds of things that these people are doing and the kinds of things that people are doing that I mentioned in the postscript. But we need more of them. There are thousands of them already. But we need what I call a tsunami of changed lives who say other people have rights too, and I can't put myself in the position of caring about no one but myself, because that, if you extend it to the world, is the kind of world that we're living in today, and which we're finding so unsatisfactory. And the kind of world that is possible is one where all of the religions work together, because they all have allegiance to that one simple suggestion, that the golden rule or some variation of it, basically saying that you should treat every other person in exactly the same way that you would want to be treated if the situation were reversed. And if we did that, well, then we could save the world, and we could make it a shining place. And I would hope that this would be the future for us. And there are, as a matter of fact, ETs who would like to help us in that regard, if we could just have enough disclosure to know who they are and who should get in touch with them. And they could help us in agriculture and medicine too, so that we wouldn't have to worry about reducing population drastically overnight, and could build the kind of world that anyone would really dream of, and which is, we know that what God would like to have us do, and would want for His creation.
We absolutely need that tsunami of people with morality. As you said, there are thousands of them, but we need 1 billion of them, 1 billion people to come forward. And I know a lot of this new young generation has higher standards, believes more in consciousness, believes more in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the way the standard should be for the rest of the world. And one thing that you just said, that remarkable time that you spent with hearing this person who said, who loves everybody, that if you hear their story, that you would love them. That is so true. The problem is, the politicians don't do that. They look at people as numbers. So, for instance, a drone sent to, say, Afghanistan to take out, suppose, a terrorist leader. In doing so, even though it's using smart bombs and precision technology to narrow down this one house where this person is, they're going to take some collateral damage. They will probably take out a few neighbors, and in their mind, okay, well, we took out a top terrorist, but 20 lives went with it, but that's okay. The problem is 20 lives. They don't stop to think that each of these people has a story. These are fathers, sons, wives, sisters, daughters, grandmas, grandfathers, you name it. Each one of them has a story. Each one of them has a heart. Each one of them has a soul. By using them as a number and a statistic, you essentially take the morality out of it when you look at them, and you're not treating them the way they need to be treated. And so I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's what we need. And I'm hoping through this broadcast and through everything else I've ever interviewed with you, and the reason why I mentioned that I respect you so much of going out of your effort, of going out of your way in your golden years, in your retirement, at the age you are, to have such concern for our well-being of every person on this earth, to go out and write a book that gives us a plan to follow. And honestly, this is one of the best books that I have read on this topic, and it has been an honor to read it, and it's been more of an honor to know you. And we just have a couple minutes left, less than that actually, and I wanted to give you an opportunity. I know we've essentially told everybody out there what to do, what the plan is, what we hope the powers that be change. We hope that we could finally get the clean energy and get these alien artifacts to used to work in our favor rather than being used for military purposes, which is exactly what these generals have done. They've jumped the gun and said, what can we do to gain an upper hand on our enemy by turning these alien artifacts into technology for military applications, rather than using that technology for the opposite. As you said, once we have a good civilization, these visitors are going to come to us more and more often and provide us with everything, as you said, from agriculture to wisdom, the most important thing, wisdom, and of course, like you said, medicine, everything else. Mr. Hellyer, it's been always a true honor to speak with you. It's always a true honor to have any association with you, and I am truly indebted to you. In a minute or less or so, or maybe a minute and a half, if you would like to give everybody out there a final statement of what you... I mean, I know we did that for 2 hours, but if you could give everybody a final statement.
Well, I'm not in the business of selling books to make a living. On the contrary, but the book was written because I felt compelled to write it and make it available. And I hope that as many people as possible will get a copy and read it and earmark the things that impress them most, and especially the things that have to be done to create this wonderful planet of ours and this wonderful gift that we have been given into the kind of sort of beautiful place that our Creator intended when He made it. And I know that it can be done, and I just hope that we'll rally around the cause and start doing what we have to do to make it come closer to the hope and dream that He had, and that we have to share with Him.
And it'll absolutely do so. Everybody, please be sure and read Money Mafia. It is one of the most astounding books out there. The Honorable Paul T. Hellyer, the author, Mr. Hellyer. It's always an honor, as I said. Thank you so much. Everybody, this is Dr. J signing off along with my co-host Johnny Webb. Join us again Tuesdays for our live show and, of course, for our new extended show. Signing off.